The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are simply that, opinions. All are presumed innocent until proven otherwise in a court of law. Sensitive topics are discussed. Discretion is advised.
Tonight on Closing Arguments, Suzanne Morphew was reported missing after leaving for a bike ride on Mother's Day of 2020. Her remains weren't discovered until 3 years later. Now, Suzanne Morphew's husband, Barry, is charged with her murder. And today, Barry was released on bond while he awaits trial. But should he be out? And in Iowa, Karina Cooper convicted of the first-degree murder of her husband, Ryan. Prosecutors say she and her lover plotted the murder to collect $50,000 in life insurance. Now Karina is back in court facing sentencing. But first, he's been called one of Gen Z's most buzzed about artists. Singer-songwriter David broke through in 2022 with hit song Romantic Homicide, going viral on TikTok and peaking at number 4 on Billboard's Hot Rock and Alternative Songs chart. But David's tour is now canceled, and he is at the center of a possible homicide investigation. This because on September 8th, the decomposing body of a teenager, Celeste Rivas, was found in an abandoned Tesla registered to David. Tonight, we have the latest in the investigation. Good evening and welcome to Closing Arguments. I'm Julia Janae, filling in for Vinnie Politan tonight. Thank you for being with us as we follow this story that has so many unusual circumstances that all seem to point to a famed singer. On September 8th, police responded to a report of a foul odor coming from a Tesla that was impounded at Hollywood Tow Service in Los Angeles. In the trunk, investigators found the unthinkable: human remains. Investigators also learned that that car was registered to singer-songwriter David, whose real name is David Anthony Burke. And these remains were dismembered, and they were later identified as a teenager named Celeste Rivas. She would have been 15 years old on the day that she was discovered. She had been reported missing from Lake Elsinore, California. That was in April of last year. The medical examiner's report stated that Celeste's body was decomposed. She was wearing a tube top, black leggings, a yellow bracelet, and stud earrings. And most interestingly, Celeste had a tattoo on her right index finger that simply read, "Shh." And singer-songwriter David also has the same tattoo on his finger. No one has been named as a suspect in this investigation, but it is considered a homicide. So we want to dig into this case and where this investigation seems to be leading. Let's bring in our guest for this hour, host of the Outlier podcast and pop crime TV reporter Lauren Conlon is with us. Lauren, thanks so much for joining us and talking about this case where we just seem to get more and more details that are centering around this famous person. Now, there may be a lot of our viewers who say they don't know anything about David. He's got this unusual spelling of his name where the number 4 is in it. Let's set the scene first and start with who is David. How much success does he have, and what's his background like?
Yes, he actually grew to fame on TikTok. So he had this huge following of young people. He blew up, and now he is doing a world tour. And this guy, I was shocked to see it. He has about 2 million followers on Instagram alone. And his rise to fame was pretty rapid. Now, he has connected with people like Benny Blanco. If you look at his social media, the house that was actually just searched, which doesn't belong to him, reportedly it belongs to his manager. He had photos of Benny Blanco in this house. He was entertaining people in this house. So again, he seems to have rose to fame very quickly with a very large following. He's very active with his social media users. He's active on Discord. He does a lot of streams, and Celeste was actually seen in 2 of these streams. And recently, the Discord moderator came out and said, you know, we had no idea that this girl Celeste was missing, and we really had no idea that she was 13 or 14 at the time. We thought she was hanging out with David and she was 18 or 19. So they had no idea. And these moderators are really distancing themselves from David and from this whole thing.
And that's big, those ages in particular that you're talking about, because her 15th birthday would have been around the time that she was discovered, but when she was reported missing, she was only 13 years old. And it sounds like you're saying other people knew where she was, didn't know that her family was looking for her. How old is David? And also, in terms of Celeste, did she have any kind of fame? I know people have been characterizing her as a singer.
She did not have any type of fame that I'm aware of, and I've dug pretty deep here, but she actually would have turned 15 on September 7th, which is the day before her body was I guess, discovered in this Tesla, which is incredibly heartbreaking here. And actually one of her teachers just kind of went viral because he came out and said, oh my gosh, I taught Celeste, and I know for a fact that she met David on social media, and she was hanging out with him, and he picked her up, and this was about April of 2024. She took off with him. Her parents or her mother called the police. The police brought her home, but then she disappeared again in May of 2024. And David, by the way, is 20 years old right now. So he would have been 18 years old when he was hanging out with her. And something that is incredibly chilling as well is, you know, the missing flyer stated that Celeste was wearing these Hello Kitty pants the last time she was seen. Well, there's a resurfaced photo of David also wearing Hello Kitty pants, looking visibly distressed in the shower. Now, I have seen just so many red flags. As you said, police have not named a suspect, but at this point, it's not looking great for David. He's canceled, a big leg of his tour. I would imagine that LAPD has said, you know what, we kind of want you to stay put right now. And I mean, if you look into his songs, right, Romantic Homicide, I mean, some of these lyrics are very disturbing. Just pulling up some lyrics to that song, he said, quote, in the back of my mind, I killed you and I didn't even regret it. He has music videos that seem to glorify romance and death. And it gives me chills. It really gives me chills.
I'm glad you mentioned the song, because that's one of his top songs, this Romantic Homicide. She's not named at all in that song, but Lauren, we understand there was a song that had a name that matched our victim here.
Yes, and this is also interesting because the song is not super easy to find. Internet sleuths kind of dug this up. In 2023, he did reportedly record a song, which was called Celeste, and he kind of talks about, you know, this girl that he's in love with, and I think he mentioned something about a tattoo on her chest. So that right there, you know, that says a lot, as well as some of these streams that are coming out with the two of them again on Discord. And they're talking about really just inappropriate things here. I think that something that was brought up on one of the streams, they were referring to Epstein and just, you know, the assaulting of children. And then they quickly say, oh, delete this. And, you know, a lot of these videos, not all of them, but when you see Celeste, you know, she's got a hood on a lot of the time, or these big glasses. And I just have to think that, you know, she didn't want to get caught. She knew that maybe her parents wouldn't approve, you know, someone in her life wouldn't approve. So she seems to be, you know, hiding her face just a bit.
Yeah, you mentioned that you've had to dig up some things when it comes to this case and understanding more about the people involved. We were able to obtain an interview that David did. It's undated, it's from the past, but we want to just take a look at that because that's going to help people understand who maybe don't or haven't ever seen him before or followed him on TikTok or heard his music. Here's a listen.
I rock with New York heavy. I love that place so much. And I was in New York 7 years of my life. I moved to Texas when I was like 8 years old. And then after that, I was homeschooled. So I didn't really I wasn't shaped by my environment whatsoever. It was mostly just, I was such an internet kid. The internet is really what I claim as my home. Like, if you ask me where I'm from, I say the internet. Because I was just online every day, doing my schoolwork, making songs, making a video, being a YouTuber, content creator, posting TikToks, posting on Instagram. Like, that's really my neighborhood was Instagram and the society was the internet. You know what I'm saying? So I'm very appreciative and grateful for the art that comes out of Houston and the art that comes out of New York. But it hasn't shaped my artistry at all.
Lauren Conlon, thank you so much for all of your insight on this. I know we'll be checking in with you as this case develops. We want to bring in our think tank now, who we have standing by to talk about all these details. What do they mean in this investigation? We have with us criminal defense attorney Josh Colesrud. We also have former law enforcement officer and host of the Strong Enough podcast, Claudia King, and private investigator Lauren Vellucci is with us. Great to see you all. Josh, let me start with you. Your thoughts about where we are in the investigation in this case and all of these unusual coincidences that seem to be stacking up against the singer.
Well, we're certainly at the beginning, and in any violent criminal case, there's no such thing as coincidence. Now, every coincidence is circumstantial evidence. They're a data point that points at motive. And here, one of the main pieces of evidence, obviously, is the body, but also the Tesla. The Tesla is like a supercomputer, and it's going to be able to tell investigators so much about the timeline. And the timeline in this case is particularly important because of when the body was found and also where David may have been at the time that it was found. So that's going to be really important. Also, I'm really looking forward to hearing from the toxicology analyst to see, was this an overdose or was there some type of poison or foul play involved? Also, we haven't heard much about the cause of death other than it's pending. One of the things I also noticed was that, David's representative said that he is cooperating, but what we didn't hear was he didn't do it. We didn't hear that he had nothing to do with this. We didn't hear that he didn't know her, which is kind of what you'd expect to hear from somebody who had nothing to do with a violent crime. So I think that, David is doing what he should be doing, which is lawyering up and canceling his tour and taking this seriously. But I think there's smoke here, and we're going to find out really soon if there's fire.
Yeah, cause of death still pending. That's an important point to bring out, Josh, because we don't know many of the details. But, Claudia, I want to ask you about this. We have from ABC 7 Eyewitness News. They've reported these details about this search of the home where he's connected to. A Hollywood Hills home where he had been living was searched overnight. Law enforcement sources told ABC News on Thursday as authorities investigate the death of a teenage girl whose body was found in the trunk of a Tesla registered to the 20-year-old singer. A search warrant was executed at this home. The singer doesn't own it, but had been staying at it, sources said. Now, Los Angeles Police Department detectives, they were seen taking a computer and several other items out of the home. Los Angeles police confirmed Thursday that the search warrant was in connection to the death of the teenager Celeste. Claudia, what do you think about where we are in this case?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Josh said. There's definitely smoke here, and I think there's a lot that has to be done by law enforcement. When you look at both the vehicle, which is registered to him, but also the house, he can very easily say, well, there's a bunch of people under the umbrella of my organization, and so, so-and-so was driving it, or so-and-so had this, or this other person was at the house. So I think there is a lot to go through, and they're going to have to likely eliminate a lot of people if it really is David and they want to get the case to go to the jury and get a guilty verdict. There is a lot of work to be done.
Lauren, when you're hearing the details of someone reported missing a while ago and the body being found decomposed and dismembered, what sort of things do you think these law enforcement detectives are looking for inside of that home, especially if a long time has passed?
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to be taking apart drains to see if she was possibly dismembered in the bathtub. They're going to be looking for bones, tissue samples, and they are specifically looking for blood evidence, I've been told in this case, in the home to place her there. This is a crazy case. It makes no sense to me. To me, in my opinion, it screams some kind of a mental break, because when you dismember someone, you're doing it for a reason, to go ahead and discard them somewhere, but then you're going to just not do that and abandon your car a few blocks away from your home. It's just very strange, but I have no doubt that where there's smoke, there's fire, like the rest of the panel said. So it's not looking good for David here.
Josh, final question about the age gap here and the age of the victim. Even if the charges don't come out with homicide, do you think there could be potentially other charges that could be connected to this case?
Yes, so they're going to be looking at through the victim's phone, assuming they find it, but also David's phone. And if there's any evidence whatsoever that he was having any type of sexual contact with her, I have no doubt that there will be some type of sex abuse charges that are brought alongside the homicide if it's proven that he had anything to do with it.
All right, Think Tank, thank you so much. We will continue to follow this story and bring any updates that happen. Again, remember that tour dates for the singer have been canceled. He had one that was scheduled for this week. Everyone is going to come back with us when we come back from this break. We're going to cover this story. An Iowa woman who was convicted of shooting her husband in the face in a recliner. She learned her fate today. Plus, coming up in the next hour on VPI. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, Tyler Robinson is accused of murdering famed speaker Charlie Kirk during a college event in Utah last week. After a peaceful surrender to law enforcement, Tyler Robinson is behind bars, and everyone is wondering, who is Tyler Robinson and why did he do it? We investigate.
The Court TV podcast will return.
On June 18th of 2021, Karina Cooper calls 911 to report finding her husband Ryan covered in blood. The father of her 3 children had been shot twice in the face. Investigators zero in on Karina Cooper and another man, Houston Danker. The pair are friends. She cut his hair, but police suspected more.
I wasn't telling her I needed help, but I was kind of, right. And then she offered, and that's where I would say that's where the chatting started, the friendship,
Mm-hmm. And then you described it as what, your gay friend, or how'd you describe it?
The best way I could put it is, just a gay best friend,
Investigators say chats revealed that Houston Danker and Karina Cooper were lovers, allegedly plotting to kill her husband to collect $500,000 in insurance money. Both were charged with murder. Karina Cooper stood trial in July and testified about her relationship with Danker.
Why did you stop cutting his hair?
Because I had sex with him, and I didn't want him around, and I didn't want that chance of that happening ever again.
Did Houston talk about killing Ryan?
Several times.
Did you ever take him seriously?
No, I thought he was full of crap.
Karina told the jury Danker acted on his own to kill her husband.
Then when the police get there, why didn't you tell them Houston shot my husband?
I was so scared. I was scared. I was panicked.
The jury found Karina Cooper guilty of first-degree murder.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Karina Cooper, guilty of the offense of murder in the first degree, dated this 11th day of July, 2025.
Ryan Cooper was a father. He was someone who was a hard worker by all accounts, taking care of his family, enjoying an evening at home, sitting in his recliner, completely unaware that his wife was plotting his death with her boyfriend. And it took years before she was actually arrested for the crime. Both Karina Cooper and Houston Danker were charged. Houston Danker took a deal, but Karina Cooper went all the way to a trial, taking the stand to tell the jury she had nothing to do with it. They did not agree, and today was sentencing day. Let's take a listen to the victim impact statements from those who loved Ryan Cooper.
Back in July, just 2 months ago, we all heard the horrific details of the day that Ryan was murdered and the absolutely disgusting 5 months of planning that led up to that day. But what ensued in the coming months, weeks, coming days, weeks, months, and years was atrocious. Imagine your brother had been murdered. Imagine the person responsible for his murder was living in your brother's home along with him and his 3 young children. The heinous crime was committed in their home while 3 of the children slept upstairs. And no efforts were made by the person responsible to protect his children from either the purported random intruder or from the horrific crime scene. Within 24 hours, you've been assured by law enforcement that the evidence collected thus far undeniably demonstrates her involvement. Though much of the evidence is unable to be disclosed, you know just enough to begin putting the pieces together. Meanwhile, you are grieving and processing the murder of your brother. You are planning a funeral, all the details being decided alongside your brother's murderer. And that's just the beginning. The person responsible for your brother's murder now has custody of your brother's children. This person, who is typically a passionate, intense, assertive, and aggressive person, has nothing to share with law enforcement, offers no details or insights into who or how someone could come into their home and murder your brother, and never seeks a single update on the status of the case from law enforcement. Over the next 32 months, you want to see your brother's children. You want to remain part of their lives. You want them to know how important they are to you. But in order to do that, you have to spend birthdays, holidays, vacations, other family events, and community activities with your brother's murderer. You want to be there for anything and everything your niece and nephews might need. But along with spending time with the kids, you must also spend time with your brother's murderer. You want to help support their well-being and provide for their basic needs if they have lost not only their father, but the place they could call home. So you provide them and your brother's murderer with family acreage. During all this time, your brother's murder is parading around the community, portraying herself as a grieving widow and a victim. She is manipulating anyone and everyone who would listen. She rarely ever speaks your brother's name, only occasionally mentioning him in conversation, and then referring to him only as husband. She sought praise and accolades for her actions and her efforts in building this new life for herself and her children. The new life that began when she murdered your brother.
Ms. Cooper is adjudicated to be guilty of the offense of murder in the first degree in violation of Iowa Code Sections 701.7 and 707.2, Parent 1, Parent A, and judgment is entered accordingly. She is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her custody is placed with the Director of the Division of Adult Corrections for temporary custody with the County Sheriff. As far as the reasons for my sentence are concerned, the sentence imposes a mandatory sentence about which the court has no discretion. I will say, this was a senseless crime. Mr. Cooper was, by what I heard at trial and from the statements I heard today, a hardworking, kind, generous man who loved his children and his many friends. Ms. Cooper, your actions, whether you were the one who shot Mr. Cooper or whether as a result of aiding and abetting Houston Danker resulted in his death, they deprived your children of not only a father, but of a mother. And I can't really state any more eloquently than was stated in the victim impact statements, the broader impact it's had on Mr. Cooper's many friends and family.
Life without parole for Karina Cooper. It's a mandatory sentence there in Iowa. She didn't have anything to say at this sentencing, not showing necessarily any remorse in terms of her words on the record. Let's bring in our think tank, still with us, Josh Colesrud, Claudia King, and Lauren Vellucci. Claudia King, I know you analyzed this case for us back when it was going on. Today we have the woman who may or may not have pulled the trigger. You even heard the judge say, we're not sure on it. It may have been her boyfriend, it may have been her. Is this justice served?
This is absolutely justice served, because the evidence shows, and like you said, whether or not she was the one that pulled the trigger, she was deeply involved in the planning process of this murder. She was there when it happened, and she took away her children's father in such a brutal, horrible way. What's worse, I think, is that watching her cry throughout this entire process, I think these are tears for herself. She doesn't really care about anyone else, and she's crying because she got caught, because the jury didn't believe her, and now she gets to spend the rest of her life in jail. I think she's exactly where she belongs.
Lauren, what stood out to you about this case? It was a strange plot, this plan for 5 months, we heard, where she and her boyfriend were trying to get this $50,000 life insurance policy, and they weren't arrested for years, but we found out at trial they didn't spend any of the money, and they really didn't even talk to each other much after this murder.
Yeah, at least they had the smarts to do that, but they obviously didn't cover their tracks well enough. There was messages deleted, but what really stands out to me is when they came to the home, when law enforcement got there and they found her husband deceased, she was sitting on top of him in the recliner. So strange. And then what rattles me about cases like this is when people do these heinous things with their children in the home. Because no matter if the child saw that, they are there for the aftermath of it, which is trauma for those children for life.
Something that stands out about this one, and you just reminded me, Lauren, her son actually slipped in the blood getting to his father. I mean, horrific. She asked her son to sleep upstairs that night, clearly knowing what was happening. Josh Colesrud, I don't know if there would have been any hope. She had a great defense team. They tried what they could with her to distance her from Houston Danker. Do you think it could have gone differently for her if she had, at the very beginning, told police, my boyfriend came here to shoot him?
Definitely. You know, this case was built on circumstantial evidence. You know, there was certainly a motive for money with the $500,000 life insurance policy. Also, the lover in this case, a co-defendant. I think that she would also have had much better a chance if Houston would have testified in her trial that she had nothing to do with it. But he didn't do that, did he? In fact, you know, he did something that was, you know, kind of unusual in these types of cases, where he pled guilty to the court without a plea agreement, meaning that he just accepted his fate of receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole and without a trial. You know, that's just not something that we see very often in cases where the penalty is so severe. So, you know, she certainly got what was coming to her, and today certainly was also about the victims who had a lot to say about how this affected them.
Oh, absolutely. Heartbreaking stuff that we heard from the victim impact. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Josh. I want to follow up with you on that Houston Danker took that unusual move. We weren't sure if he was going to come in and testify as a state's witness. He didn't. And then we thought he was going to take his chances at trial and point the finger at her. Where do you think the thought process was for the defense to not try and make a deal? Perhaps, we don't know if they tried, but then to completely avoid a trial. And as you mentioned, he gets the mandatory sentence if he pleads that way, or does he think it's going to benefit him?
Well, based on the statements given by his defense attorneys, he felt like this was the right thing to do. He had a moment where he felt like he didn't want to put his family and friends through a trial, and decided to accept responsibility for what he's done. And you know what? I have to give him credit for that. You know, obviously what he did was evil and horrible, but saving the victim's family, the anguish of having to go through a second trial, that means something. But, you know, there is that lingering question that if you're his attorneys, you know, did they try to get a deal saying, look, you know, we'll plead guilty, we'll testify against the co-defendant, the female, excuse me, Ms. Cooper, in exchange for a deal. Now, we haven't heard anything about that, but, you know, it is another piece of the puzzle we don't quite yet know yet.
Oh, yeah, we don't know so many details, but definitely some finality there inside of the courtroom with this mandatory sentence being handed down. Claudia King, your final thoughts. I know you're a domestic violence expert, and in this situation, we didn't hear anything come out of what transpired between this husband and wife, but these kids have experienced something that is certainly traumatic.
Absolutely, and that is so unfortunate because we know that children who experience this type of violence, even when it wasn't directly on them, they're still going to have lifelong effects of that. And so I really hope these children are in therapy. I hope they're being well taken care of. And it's so unfortunate that, first off, this had to happen, but she was so selfish that she let the kids be there and she let one of the kids see his father in that state. So sad.
Yeah, great points. And Orion's sister said that they are in therapy. She mentioned that today during the victim impact statements. Think Tank, thank you for that analysis. Stay where you are. When we come back, we're going to talk about another case, a man who is out, someone who's been in and out of jail, all accused of murder in the death of his wife, Suzanne. When we come back.
Now, back to the Court TV podcast.
On June 20th, Morphew was taken into custody in Maricopa County, Arizona. This comes nearly 2 years after Denver 7 was the only station alongside investigators as they discovered his missing wife's remains just outside of the town of Moffett. New details from a grand jury indictment say Barry was the last known person to see her alive. And during Suzanne Morphew's autopsy, an animal tranquilizer known as BAM was found in her bones. The indictment claims that Barry was a deer farmer and the only private citizen living in that entire area of the state that had access to BAM at the time of his wife's disappearance.
The case against Barry Morphew has been a pendulum swing. At one point, he was arrested, and then those charges were dismissed, and he was released, and then he was charged again and put behind bars. And now he has been asking to get out. Well, tonight he has been released from custody. And here's what the lead up was. Let's listen back to a September 2nd hearing where he was asking for a reduced bond.
In weighing each of these factors and making an assessment of Mr. Morphew's specific situation, I declined to reduce his bail, but I am going to modify his bond. I'm going to modify his bond to a cash surety or property bond. In this district, we often set bond at a higher surety or property option with a lesser cash-only option, but I won't be doing that in this case. The reason why is because if Mr. Morphew posts bond through a surety and then absconds, he not only has $300,000 on the line, but there's also a bail bonds person who would be tracking him down. And if he chose to post a cash-only option, then he would have $3 million on the line. If Mr. Morphew posts bond, the added conditions are that Mr. Morphew may not leave the state of Colorado for any reason. Mr. Morphew will have a GPS monitor placed on him before he is released, and he may not leave his home for any reason except for medical emergencies, to attend medical appointments, to meet with his attorneys, or to attend to court. The GPS monitor company shall submit a report to the court at least monthly and shall report any violation, including tampering with the monitor or failing to keep it charged immediately. Mr. Morphew will surrender any passports he has. He will also use only the name Barry Morphew in any personal, legal, and business dealings, and he may not petition to change his name legally during the pendency of this case. He may only drive vehicles that are properly registered to him and that comply with the Colorado Department of Revenue's rules. And finally, Mr. Morphew shall comply with the mandatory protection orders that I'll be issuing here momentarily and will advise Mr. Morphew about in a few minutes.
So cash only to a cash surety bail. Alamosa County Sheriff's Office told us this. Barry Morphew has posted bond and has been released from our county jail. No further information will be provided. Let's bring back in the think tank. We have Josh Bolsrud, Claudia King, and Lauren Vellucci in with us. Josh, I got to start with you on this one. Can you explain what happened here? He had a $3 million bond, and because of that shift, we're presuming that he was able to pay it because now he was only required to pay a lot less.
Yeah, just to give the listeners a little bit of context, there's two different types of bond that exist in our judicial system. You have a cash-only bond, meaning that you literally have to come up with, in this case, $3 million if you're going to be released. Or, as the judge did here, you have a secured appearance bond or a surety bond, which allows you to come up with either 10 or 20% and then have the collateral available to a bond company for the remaining amount. But the reason why the judge did this is, number one, his attorney brought this up. During the last trial, during the last case, he had a bond of $500,000, and he was able to post it. And he attended and he was at every single court proceeding. He didn't miss an appointment with pretrial services. He followed all the court rules. So he has a good track record. Also, I'm not necessarily familiar with his criminal history, but there's been no allegation that he's committed any other crime since 2020. So the judge has to consider, is he a substantial flight risk and is he a substantial danger to the community? And, having a $3 million secured appearance bond is still pretty hefty. And based on how the defendant was in the last case, that I think that this is probably a pretty typical result in a case like this.
Typical result. We have a lot of terms there. Lauren, in terms of this house arrest that he's under, he can't have drugs or alcohol. He can't use a fake name. Do you think that this is sufficient? What do you think about him being out based on the charges that he's facing?
Yeah, I personally think he's low risk to hurt anyone in the community. I just struggle with it because I know the absolute suffering that Suzanne went through being murdered in this manner. She didn't die quickly. So I understand the law and the reason for bond. So I do think it was appropriate, but I also have a moral fight with this one because of the conditions that she died under.
Let's listen to some details that include the evidence that's against Barry Morphew, including this sedative evidence that police have.
Insofar as the indictment, Your Honor, as the court knows, that is a cherry-picked piece of narrative that has been created exclusively by the district attorney. The BAM that the district attorney mentions that Mr. Morphew had access to, I want to be clear on, was prescribed to him in the state of Indiana in 2018. Mr. Morphew has not had access to BAM since 2018.
The remains of Suzanne Morphew after an autopsy contained a chemical compound that Mr. Morphew had almost exclusive access to, tying him directly to the remains of his wife. The case in 2021 was arguably entirely circumstantial with no body. This case is very different.
Claudia King, they're saying there that they've got almost a fingerprint with this sedative because he was the only one who was licensed to have it in that area. But I gotta say, with charges being brought and dropped and now even him being out on bond and not being deemed a flight risk, do you think the prosecution's case is extremely strong?
I think it's definitely stronger than it was previously in 2021, and a lot of that does have to do with this sedative because they found her body and they were able to conclusively say that it was in her body. It is a very circumstantial case, though, but I look at that kind of like a patchwork quilt. So you have all these different squares that look silly by themselves or don't mean much, but when you put them all together, it shows what really happened. And I do think that the prosecution has a strong case at this point.
Josh, in terms of the judge allowing him to be out on bond, essentially by lowering it, it does allow him to have better access to being able to get out. Does that say anything to the strength of the case, or is it solely focused? Because we see all the time that prosecutors come in and talk about the details of the crime versus just whether they're a flight risk and whether they will re-offend.
So the strength of the government's case is always a consideration, but it carries the least amount of weight in these bond release hearings. Remember, this isn't a trial. This is just in a hearing to evaluate whether or not this person, again, is a substantial danger to the community or a substantial flight risk. And I do agree with my colleague Claudia that, you know, this is a much stronger case than it was the first time around because they actually have a body. And through the forensics, they were able to determine that it had traces of that tranquilizer that only he had access to. So it's going to be really interesting to see how his defense tries to explain that away.
Absolutely. Our thanks to the think tank for all of that analysis this hour. Josh Colesrud, Claudia King, and Lauren Vellucci. We do have to get to our break, but when we come back, we will reveal something else you need to know. Plus, coming up in the next hour on Vinnie Politan Investigates. Tonight on VPI, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson is in custody, charged with the fatal public shooting of political debater and activist Charlie Kirk. Investigators say text messages to his roommate/lover contain a confession and his motive. What do our experts think the messages reveal?
This is the Court TV podcast.
Welcome back. We've reached that time in the show where we reveal something else you need to know. Let's put it up on the big board. A new trial we are jumping onto here on Court TV. Dakota Van Patten is charged with first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping in the death of 20-year-old Melody Hoffman. Prosecutors say Van Patten helped his friend commit the kidnapping and murder plot. Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas has the story.
Melody Hoffman suffered unspeakable atrocities.
In February of last year, the body of 20-year-old Melody Hoffman was found by a lake in Des Moines, Iowa.
She was beaten, she was bound, she was kidnapped, she was strangled, she was mutilated, and she was left for dead.
Dakota Van Patten is now the second man to go on trial for Hoffman's kidnapping and murder. Prosecutors say Van Patten conspired with Hoffman's former boyfriend, McKinley Louisma, and the pair used machetes to stab her. Authorities say data from Hoffman's iPhone and Apple Watch proves Van Patten and Louisma were with her when she was allegedly kidnapped from Morgan Creek Park in Des Moines until her body was dumped near Lily Pond Lake. Louisma was convicted of first-degree murder last year and sentenced to life in prison.
I know Melody would want me to forgive you, but I'm not sure that'll ever happen. And if it does, it's only for her.
In Van Patten's case, prosecutors say surveillance video allegedly shows him and Louisma buying gloves and machetes before the killing. A search of Van Patten's home turned up a towing rope they believe was the murder weapon and Melody Hoffman's glasses. Van Patten's attorney says the evidence does not prove he killed Melody.
The evidence will show Dakota was with Melody. But is his mere presence enough to reach this high burden of beyond a reasonable doubt? Can the state rule out the possibility that Dakota was just there and not partaking in what happened to her?
Van Patten has pleaded not guilty to charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping. A third man, Logan Kempton, also faces lesser charges in this case. His trial is set for later this year.
Testimony in that case continues here on Court TV Live starting Monday morning. Before we end this hour, though, there is a picture that I want to show you. Please take a look at the screen. This is Asa Davis. Asa is a 15-year-old male who was last seen in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma on September 15th. If you have any information about where Asa is tonight, call the Oklahoma City Police Department. That number is on your screen, or you can call 911 or 1-800-THE-LOST. Let's see if we can get Asa to a safe place tonight. And don't go anywhere. We have another hour of live true crime coming up next on Vinnie Politan Investigates.
There you have it. If you want to see more in-depth reporting on the latest true crime stories, you can see me every weeknight, 8 p.m. Eastern on Closing Arguments. Thank you so much for downloading. And as always, please don't forget to hug the kids.
This podcast is a production of Court TV. Go to CourtTV.com for more content, trials on demand, and to find out how to watch Court TV in your area.